Response to Lupo Radical and a bit of a response to Jose Gonzalez on Andrew Tate. Okay, first of all, I'm just going to state this. Andrew Tate has said a couple of things online that are not disagreeable, some of which make sense, as even the worst of people can do. Now, incidentally, this is an incredible cup of coffee. This is a mixture of regular coffee and mushroom-infused coffee with reishi and gandormidia and so on and so forth. So it's got nootropics effects along with the caffeine. In it is a teaspoon of powdered greens and a teaspoon of completely unsweetened cacao. And some stevia or stevia. I've always been pronouncing it stevia, but people say it's stevia. So there's no sugar in it, and a little bit of almond milk, which I'm kind of switching towards for my morning coffee, because it has no sugar, low in carb, and has adequate protein and nutrients. It doesn't taste bad, and when you heat it up to put in your coffee, it heats up well, doesn't clump up. So, Andrew Tate, he said you don't need to know any grappling to fight and should focus on punching and kicking. Interesting idea. He has a striking background. It doesn't surprise me. People tend to be prejudiced towards their background. Truth of the matter is, the real world is messy. It's really messy. Fights start standing. Very few start on your butt or on the ground. So I think that's kind of a poor self-defense training method, although it has its uses. It's useful for isolating things. I'm not anti-Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm not anti-sport technique, anti-traditional technique. If I had to give myself a label, call me a knowledgeist. I like knowledge and the application of knowledge and the teaching of knowledge the right way, a way that is useful. So, Andrew Tate, the more I research him, the less I like him, the less respect I have for him, and the more I think he's a fake and a fraud in some areas. He's not my mentor. He's not my guide in any way, right? My friend Jose Gonzalez just sent me a text the other day that says, you want to sit down for this because he's been, arrested or accused or whatever of human trafficking and all these things. It doesn't surprise me, Jose. It doesn't surprise me. He also seems like a fake and a fraud. Like his conversion to Islam just seems so fake, and I don't think he knows what he claims that he's getting into. Right? Islam looks down on ostentation and huge displays of wealth, and him texting Greta Thunberg bragging about his cars and his emissions. I mean, I'm sure there's imams would have a field day with that, as would most members of Abrahamic religions. So I think he's kind of just a bit of a fake and a fraud in that aspect. Sure, he was a fighter. He fought. He didn't do bad. He wanted to fight Jake Paul. He doesn't impress me. He doesn't, he brags about all the girlfriends he has, which he, put them on webcams. That's how he got rich, which, again, he's pretending to be a religious guy. Most Muslims are like, well, you need to take that wealth and donate it to charity and stop making wealth that way. And apparently he got human trafficking charges. So, yeah, not that impressed with Andrew Tate. Not that impressed with his advice. If the ground exists and fights can exist on it, and you're serious about self-defense, learn how to fight on the ground. Now, I wouldn't have a competitive BJJ mindset where all I'm thinking of doing is, let me get close, get on the ground, even if it means grabbing onto him, putting my foot on his hip, controlling his elbow, falling on my back, dragging him on top of me into my guard on the street. That's not a good thing to do on the street, but can you get taken down on the street? Hell yeah. Is the guard probably one of the greatest contributions and all the guard techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to the martial arts scene? Yeah, it's rudimentary or non-existent in many other grappling arts, to include old judo. But the ground is messy. I've been in grappling incidents, actual fights, right? Not in the ring, actual fights that went to the ground. And, my goal has never been to stay there, right? I even wound up putting someone in an armbar. Incidentally, all the high percentage techniques in MMA are right out of old judo. Rear naked choke, the so-called Americana, the armbar, the triangle choke, the leg lock. They're all from judo. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu didn't invent many of the things it does. It just changed emphasis, developed strategies, and training methods, practice methods to achieve this type of strategy. You could even call it a type of judo, right? Don't get mad. Don't be hating. I like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for what it is, for its limitations and its abilities. So yeah, Andrew Tate, to me that's a no-go, right? He brags about all the women he has, and he says, well, sex is stupid, I don't even enjoy sex. And I'm like, all right, what's the point? You brag about all the women you have, you become the great ladies man, and you don't even enjoy it. What next? Celibacy? Homosexuality? Are you, can you imagine being someone who has no sexual interest in men, right? Which is most of me, most of us. I mean, I don't really care. I don't care if you're gay. Be gay, as long as you're not forcing no one. But it's not my thing. I think women are beautiful. Women are sexy. Women, to have a beautiful woman in your arms, even if you're not making love to her, but even if you are, I mean, one of the pleasures in life, right? Oftentimes, for many guys, not an easy thing to do. But to be sexually attracted to women to the point where you make all this effort to have multiple girlfriends and then all of a sudden not want sex, so what are you going to do? What's the point? Right? You don't enjoy the presence of women, yet you're in the presence of many women. You don't enjoy having sex with them, but you brag about your masculinity. I mean, do you then, start sucking guys off because, I don't know, you want to be masculine and be with masculine beings sexually? You make no sense, Andrew Tate. You make no sense. And you've got a lot of followers, and I think you're not leading them anywhere good. Hating the dating scene, hating the way relationships are and can be between men and women is, can be valid. But hating women, what's the point? We're part of the same species, right? Hating other races. I can hate what white people do. I can hate, for example, many Middle Eastern people are not fair to their women. They oppress their women, but I don't hate them as a race, right? Black people are very different than white people. Both races. I'm not a member of either one, really, right? Both races have some things that I don't like, some quirks, some cultural attributes that I hate. But I like them as people, as a race, as a species. Okay, hate's not that useful most of the time. If someone's coming at you with a knife and you have to draw your knife or grab an improvised weapon, hate might be useful in that incident, right? But then what do? That person was a redhead, so for the rest of your life, you want to go out and fight redheads? Not useful, right? Andrew Tate's a hater, and sometimes what happens is you get a guy who comes upon a bit of the truth. Certain aspects of male-female relationships are just not that good. They need to be reformed. And then you get there, and you can only go so far with it. You're like, okay, so let's create a reformation. Let's do something to fix the situation. Then what? I mean, move on. If you've made the change and made things better, move on. But you're like, well, my videos on this got really popular, so I just have to keep delving to the point where you become a straight-up misogynist, right? And, honestly, if you think you're a man because you made all your millions of dollars by putting multiple girls on webcams to masturbate in front of cameras, you're not that much of a man. you know, you didn't do it by like getting high purses and fighting. You didn't create like an incredible industrial product that improves people's lives, doesn't cost a lot, and doesn't pollute. That's infinitely more manly, in my opinion, or womanly. Andrew Tate, yeah, not that impressed. Not an enemy of his, but this recent news about allegations of human trafficking, I don't know how bad it was. Was he just being a pimp, or was he, getting underage girls and getting them to do things? I don't know. Right? Depending on, if you're looking for a mentor in the field of dating, martial arts, or money making, there's a few hundred or 1,000 out there that are better examples than Andrew Tate. You might not like what this sister has to say, but there's a webpage called The Financial Diet, and I forget the lady's name, but start with her older videos first, and she does begin making a lot of sense, right? She's a female, and she's got a feminine viewpoint, so you hardcore Andrew Tate fans who have convinced yourself nothing any woman anywhere says is good, you're off, right? I'm trying to be a writer. There's a female YouTuber named Jenna Moresi who, produces tons of videos on the business of writing, how to be a writer, but she goes so into specifics. She makes entire videos on the 10 best ways to do dialogue, and then she'll make a video on the 10 worst ways to make dialogue, 10 best ways to do character development in science fiction, in fantasy, in romantic fiction, and then the 10 worst. And she'll go all the way down to a video on how to punctuate dialogue, a video on dialogue tags, a video on marketing yourself. And there's a lot of wisdom in her videos. I've learned more from her videos on writing and the business of writing and the mechanics of writing than looking at Stephen King and George R.R. Martin interviews. Those guys just talk about the mentality, the mindset, their struggle, the money they made, and their history. She gets into so many brass tacks. It's like a bed of brass tacks. And you know what? I get the feeling I wouldn't necessarily enjoy talking to her. She talks a mile a minute in a high-pitched voice, which is kind of like Alvin and the Chipmunks. She's a beautiful Italian-American girl, very attractive. But she has some kind of mental anxiety or something disorder, and she's kind of like insulting and condescending to her audience. She'll often call her audience you dummy or something like that. So even though she's giving out all this advice and constantly promoting her best-selling book, I might not buy her book because I don't, a book is an outgrowth of that person's brain and that person's inner world, and I might not want to get into her inner world. But I'm going to straight up say, if you want a mentor in writing and the business of writing and making money, there's one woman, right? Andrew Tate. Yeah, said a few good things. Was clever in a couple of interviews where the interviewer, like Piers Morgan, tried to trip him up a bit, but he just seems like yet another guy moving into the right-wing fascist sphere, the misogynistic sphere, and, overcompensating in masculinity, right? I mean, I'm always, people that are like that are bullies. They become bullies, and, toxic masculinity is a thing. I call it being a dick. If you don't think toxic masculinity exists, you haven't hung around guys. And, one of my female student, Crystal, we had to talk about, what do you think are toxic masculine traits? Do I display any towards you, right? Because I want to be professional and I want to be a good teacher. And she's like, well, her perception of toxic masculinity is when a man is trying so hard to be masculine and independent and strong that he doesn't seek out help for himself, and that masculine behaviors that harm the man, right? Not necessarily even things like hyperaggression or overcompensation, right? So, I mean, a lot of these manosphere guys are constantly talking about being oppressed by concepts of other people, or just call everything I do toxic masculinity, when it might actually be things that they are doing that harm themselves that don't need to be, because they're trying too hard to fit into a traditional masculine role, which is true. We don't often seek help when we should. We don't often express our emotions in healthy ways when we could. Right? You know, a real man wouldn't do that. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've turned down fights and walked away from insults and had people say, "You're a pussy, you're not a real man." I'm like, I can wreck this guy with my hands. I could wreck this guy with one hand and one foot. I could wreck this guy with a pocket knife that I'm carrying. And some days I was carrying a concealed pistol. I could shoot him, empty a magazine in him. For what? An insult? All right? Is that manliness? Is it manly to insult a woman? Right? Is it manly to insult someone because of something that they have no part in, like their race? And, I think many, like sexual orientation, I think some people are born with certain traits or tendencies or maybe developed early in childhood, as long as they're not trying to sexually assault or harass you. Why? Why hate? Why insult? Aristotle said that no gentleman, and that may be a poor translation, willfully insults anyone. That's not the mark of a cultured, educated man. Will not willingly give offense, right? There are, you want to insult someone, go find a dictator like the leader of North Korea, or a wannabe dictator like Donald Trump. Stand up to his face and insult him, right? Or run for office, get elected, stand up in Congress or the Senate, and oppose with your words and your intellect something that you think is wrong in that government. Both some of the Antifa and BLM protesters and some of the people, well-intentioned, who are, protesting maybe what they think as infringement on their Second Amendment rights, are actually both expressing that spirit, right? And we have no middle ground in this country anymore. There's no way to come to an agreement or compromise with many people. They're just polarized to the extreme, but they're not really, fighting for a principle. They're fighting because they're invested in a side, and they're mostly fighting for their own ego involvement rather than, the truth. They just want to be right rather than be supporting something that is right. Right? Does that make any sense? Anyway, thank you for the question. It did spur some thought.